time to come here from our speaker tonight. I'm Tony Kunduro, Professor of Philosophy and Leadership. I'm also the Director of the Adrian College Institute for Ethics and Leadership. Our institute is committed to offering programming and resources to students, faculty, staff, and the community to help them and challenge them, develop skills for leadership and for thinking and acting ethically. When people ask me to define leadership, here's what I tell them. It's the ability, a set of actionable skills, and the process, it takes time, where someone influences others to accomplish a common goal. It's also the process through which someone helps others actualize their potential. Leadership comes in many forms and it occurs on many levels, from above, across, or from below. We often think of leaders as the people in charge of things. Presidents, CEOs, generals, social movement leaders, and so on. If this is who leaders are, then many of us will not be in such positions. Some of us will be. But if we're not, our aspirations to be leaders and to be good leaders may seem unreasonable. But as it turns out, leadership happens when people see a problem, they take initiative, and bring others along to address it and make a difference. Successful CEOs, presidents, and so on get a lot of help, and they are better at their job when they're influenced by the right other people. Great leaders see a problem, they go to work, they act, and try to address it and to solve it. They also spend a lot of time on self-development or self-leadership. Initiative and problem solving is the heart of leadership, and we should pay careful attention to those who act, to address and solve problems, and who bring others along to do the same. Our speaker today is such a person. Our presenter tonight is McKenzie Sharp, RN, BSN. She will discuss the frequency and kinds of violence faced by health workers and the possible responses and training required to prevent such violence. Ms. McKenzie Sharp earned her BSN from Boise State University, graduating summa cum laude. She was a dual enrolled graduate of the Honors College at Boise State University and a recipient of the BSU Student Leadership Award. She also presented her research on workplace violence prevention programs at the Western Institute for Nursing. Ms. McKenzie Sharp started working on an inpatient medical surgical ward at the Boise VA Medical Center in May 2019 as a Valor Nurse apprentice during her senior year of nursing school. She was a COVID graduate. Once she got her RN license, she entered a year-long RN residency program at the VA. She was placed on the step-down telemetry ward, also known as the COVID ward. So she was a COVID nurse from the start. Most of us want to forget the COVID-19 pandemic. I'm one of them. I'm sure many of you are also. It was traumatic in many ways and challenged us tremendously. But we also remember those who worked feverishly and who sacrificed a lot. We may say that during wars, soldiers are often the heroes. During pandemics, nurses are. Ms. McKenzie Sharp was selected by the Boise Veterans Affairs Medical Center to become a certified trainer for the VA's prevention and management of disruptive behavior. She is a purple belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. She works as a coach for straight class gyms, adult foundations, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu at her gym in Idaho. She trains Monday through Friday with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu competition team. She has competed at white and blue belt levels. And she also teaches self-protection for women, self-protection for teen girls, and self-protection for healthcare workers. She also travels nationally with her husband, Paul Sharp, teaching various self-protection courses and techniques. Without further ado, please help me welcome Jill McKenzie Sharp.
Thank you so much, Adrian College, for having me. It is such a pleasure and a joy, really, to share my my experience as a nurse, as a martial artist, and just share my passion about workplace violence prevention, training, and ethics. So thank you for having me. I watched a video on your YouTube channel just to learn a little bit more about your college, and your campus looks amazing. And as much as it made me miss my academic years, not quite enough to actually go back to school. So we'll see what happens in the next few years. So my entry into healthcare actually occurred way back in 2007. I worked at a freestanding birth center and home birth midwifery practice, first as a birth assistant and then as an apprentice midwife. During my time there, I attended over 300 births, either at home or at our birth center, and I caught over 100 babies in my own hands. During my years at the birth center, I also worked with the state of Idaho and the midwifery community to pass legislation to license direct entry midwives. I served on the board of directors for the Idaho Midwifery Council, and part of my service there was to educate health systems regionally on the midwifery licensure bill. I facilitated roundtable discussions in order to better serve mothers and babies and to improve outcomes in relationships between midwives and the hospital setting providers. And then at the end of my career in the midwifery field, I served as the administrative director of my freestanding birth center and home birth practice, and also was able to get it accredited, which was a really big deal. I left midwifery in 2015 and then spent some time trying to discover what my next move was. Excuse me. And I decided that I wanted to become a registered nurse. And I already knew that I wanted to lead women's health, and I also knew that I wanted to work for the VA and serve veterans, coming from a military family myself. So I sort of always had my sights set on that. In 2016, I started studying first at community college to get my prereqs, and then later transferred over to Boise State University and applied to the nursing school, which I was accepted, and then also accepted into the honors college at that time. So I was dual enrolled and very much a high achiever. When I was at community college, that is where I got my first introduction to the martial art called Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I'll share more about martial arts and my just ways that I have enhanced my expertise in self-protection. I'll talk more about that later. But as I continued through nursing school, I worked as a research assistant for the endowed chair of the nursing school. I worked as an overnight caregiver for a gentleman who had genetic epilepsy and suffered from seizures all throughout the day and night. And I also, during my senior year, earned the prestigious award of becoming a Valor Apprentice Nurse at the Boise VA, which was my original goal. When I was a Valor student nurse, I was placed on the med-surg ward. It was a paid apprenticeship of 800 hours. And it was a true apprenticeship model. So I had a bachelor's prepared registered nurse as my preceptor, and I provided nursing care and developed my nursing skills through that apprenticeship. And so this was in addition to my nursing education. Now, during my senior year of nursing school is when everything changed. I was still an overnight caregiver. I was still completing my Valor hours on the med-surg ward, and I had started my clinical rotation in the intensive care unit at the VA. And then COVID entered the scene and disrupted everybody's lives. So I was working in the intensive care unit when we first started to hear about COVID, And it's a story for another time, but it was one of the most compelling experiences of interdisciplinary teamwork and a teamwork approach to solving a problem with a ton of unknown X factors. I was issued my graduate nurse license early. It was literally called COVID-19 temporary graduate nurse license, issued under a state of emergency. I was issued my nursing license on March 27th, 2020, before I had even graduated from nursing school. I started working as a graduate nurse tech while I waited to take my test, and then I tested for licensing in June of 2020 and became a licensed registered nurse in July of 2020. Then I started a post-baccalaureate registered nurse residency at the VA. This was another very exciting opportunity. There were 6 of us in the nurse residency. I was placed on the step-down unit, which is an acute care telemetry ward. And then the residency allowed me to continue didactic work and receive additional certifications. And then I did rounds in the intensive care unit, the emergency department, step down, surgical PACU and POPA, as well as little clinics like our wound care clinic and cardiac device clinic and primary care. So I really received a very full scope nursing practice and experience in a very short amount of time. And then all of this was occurring through COVID and the rapidly evolving atmosphere and just care and coordination that was occurring with this pandemic. After I completed residency in July of 2021, I started working at an outpatient primary care clinic called Silver Team. Silver Team houses the internal medicine residency and nurse practitioner residencies at the VA. The VA is a research facility, and it's also a residency, a teaching school, basically. So I was hired as an outpatient primary care nurse care manager, and I managed care on what's called a teamlet. And my teamlet includes a administrative clerk, a licensed practical nurse, myself as the nurse care manager, and together we assist our providers in managing a patient panel of about 1,000 veterans. I have an attending physician who is in clinic every week, a chief resident who is in clinic once a day, or once a week, and then a nurse practitioner who's there every day, and then 2 third-year residents that are in clinic once a week every month. Most of my job is spent doing population health now and helping veterans manage their chronic diseases like hypertension and type 2 diabetes. I do a lot of telephone triage. I also do nursing assessments. And my personal goal, and the thing that brought me away from the bedside and into the primary care clinic, is health promotion and helping veterans assess their personal goals and values to match their lifestyle choices in order to manage their chronic diseases and experience a higher quality of life. Soon after I started my super awesome job in primary care, I was called to serve a tour of duty back in the ICU as part of the Delta variant of COVID. And you may or may not remember just the increasing demands on the hospital system at that time. And I was surged within the VA from my primary care job back to the intensive care unit. to assist in that department, the ICU and the ICU overflow. My tour of duty started in August and it ended right around Thanksgiving time, 2021, and then I've been back in the clinic since that time. So that's where I am today professionally. Now, back to my personal life, which runs, congruent with my professional life and enhances my professional life. When I was in community college in spring semester 2016, I had to write an essay for English 102, and I was sort of complaining about the task, go and do something that you've never done before and write a journalistic style essay about it. And a friend of mine had mentioned, well, why don't you do a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu consultation at SBG Idaho and write about that? So I decided to do it. It wasn't as exciting as jumping out of a plane, which is what some of my peers were doing, but that was crazy to me, and so I chose martial arts. I arrived at SBG Idaho without doing any research. I wanted to have a very authentic experience, and so I showed up. Coach Jesse put me in a traditional martial arts gi, and I tied a white belt around my waist, and he continued to teach me how to execute what's called a cross-collar choke inside the guard. And so the guard would be his legs wrapped around my waist with his hands inside the collar of my gi, and then closing his grip to choke off the carotid artery blood flow to my brain, which would make me pass out. My responsibility is to tap on him to make him stop before I pass out. So it's a very strange experience. I was riding my bike home, and I literally stopped and had to think, this is very odd. I just allowed this guy to choke me, and then I choked him back, and then somehow I feel like we are new best friends. I think this is something I should pursue. So from that point on, I have studied Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. My membership to SBG Idaho was a gift to myself for my 40th birthday in April of 2016, and I've been training ever since. I right away realized the value of this type of martial art, and I right away started making changes in my life. I felt my body changing physically. I felt my just my inner self changing, the way that I viewed conflict, interpersonal relationships. Everything started to kind of open up and evolve. I felt very strongly right away that I wanted to expose other women to this experience, and so I created a women's open mat, which allowed the female athletes to train outside the co-ed environment with other women. And with the hope and the goal to grow a women's program so that we could increase the numbers of females training at our gym. I trained or became trained in what's called Women Warriors, which is a self-defense program that SBG offers to the community. Women Warriors was created by one of the black belts in their affiliation. Her name is Leah Taylor, and the program was created through consultation with my husband, Paul Sharp. So I became a trainer for Women Warriors, and then was able to bring that to other areas of my community. Churches invited me to teach their teen girls, as well as an organization called Camp Rainbow. And then I started competing. I competed at both white belt and blue belt in 2 different weight classes, in the gi and in no gi. And then I also started training in sports. I added wrestling. And keep in mind, I'm a 40-year-old woman, and I'll be 47 next month. But I have added wrestling, judo, weightlifting, running. I have also ventured into more tactical experiences. I have done a class called Extreme Close Quarters Combat. I have completed a very high-level, long-range precision rifle class, as well as thousands of rounds and many, many hours behind the pistol. And I earned tactical combat care, tactical casualty combat care certification as well. My husband and I, starting in about November 2022, I joined my husband in traveling and teaching his curriculums, which are called Managing Unknown Contacts, Multidisciplinary Optimization Course, and Edge Weapons Defense. And so our primary mission with the work that we do outside of our day jobs is empowering people, helping them see their value and increasing their confidence, and hopefully inspiring them to invest in their own personal safety and protection, and just help build stronger people. Kind of our tagline is making good people more dangerous to bad people. So Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, martial arts, and all of my training really intersects with my professional life. The last semester of my junior year was our nursing school research course. And because of my experience with Jiu-Jitsu and the coaching that I was doing, I became interested in violence itself, perceptions of violence, and things like that. And it also became evident through nursing school that healthcare workers experience higher rates of violence than any other work sector. So I wanted to study that. So my group started making discoveries right away. Types of violence that healthcare workers face can be verbal, they can be physical, or they can be sexual. Physical violence can also include a weapon of some sort, whether that is the stethoscope that's strapped around your neck, an IV tubing, a knife, a gun, or any other hard or dangerous, or any other object that can be turned into a weapon. These assaults can be perpetrated by a patient, knowingly or unknowingly. There are some sober patients that know exactly what they are doing, and there are other patients, such as a dementia patient, who really does not have any idea of their violence or have any impulse control over that violence. These crimes can also be perpetrated by family members and even other coworkers. There is very little regulation on workplace violence. There is, our research revealed, not a standard definition for what workplace violence is. And there isn't any regulation for types of reporting, or mandatory reporting, or a central database for reporting to go to be assessed or anything like that. So the research is actually, there's not a lot of it, and it's really complex and difficult to find any real answers. So our research question became, in healthcare settings, how does a workplace violence program affect the rate of injury to healthcare workers? And what we discovered was that workplace violence protection prevention programs did not reduce rates of violence, which was incredibly discouraging to me. 75% of all workplace assaults occur in the healthcare sector. But we know that the number of incident reports is vastly underreporting. Research says that only 30% of ED nurses and 25% of ED physicians even report incidents of violence. And so that tells us that violence is an accepted part of our practice. when we go to work, we expect to be verbally assaulted or intimidated in some way. And that isn't right. So the recommendations that we made as part of our research into the Western Institute of Nursing in 2019 was that we needed compelling leadership commitment in order to fully engage employees, that perhaps legislation might increase facility compliance, that a standard definition of workplace violence would help avoid confusion, and that education and training might improve confidence. So here's where my research then, as I move through my senior year, and I have my foundation of jiu-jitsu, I'm about 3 years in, I have this background in research in workplace violence and prevention programs. I then started my Valor Nurse Apprenticeship in an acute care ward, med-surg. So as part of my new employee orientation, I completed the VA's work violence prevention program. And I was actually pretty excited, and a little light bulb went off in my head when, we reviewed what workplace violence looked like. We developed skills for de-escalation, and then we went through a series of grip breaks. If somebody was maybe grabbing your wrist and trying to grab you, or maybe they had their hand around your throat and they were trying to choke you. And I realized that the techniques that they were teaching us in this program were the same or very, very similar to what I was learning and what I was training every day at the gym during Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu practice. And so I thought, this is pretty cool. I'm on the right track, right? In my personal life, I am on the right track for protecting myself in my professional life. It also made me wonder, though, how many other people were making that same investment in themselves? And if they weren't, why? And if they went through this prevention program, did any of the education stick? And so after I started my shifts as a Valor and got to know my nursing peers, one day a bunch of us were in the staffing room charting, and I said, hey, do you remember taking the workplace violence prevention class? And of course, yes, they all remembered that. And I said, do you remember any of the skills that you learned in that class? And they all said no. And so I asked one of the nurses if I could grab her wrist and if she could break my grip. And she said okay, and I grabbed her wrist, and she could not break my grip. And it was a moment for me. I just couldn't understand, or rather, I needed to learn why there was a barrier for my nursing peers to continue to drill or to train or to do things that would increase their safety and enhance their experience at work. And this is where, a fire really gets lit under me, and my passion really starts to drive forward with just continuing my own training, but also exposing others to it. So during my 800 hours as a Valor on med-surg, I don't want, because we're talking about workplace violence, I don't want that aspect of this presentation to undermine or overshadow the number of hours and number of veterans, just the good experiences that I have had. I love being a nurse. It is a purpose-driven profession for me. It meets a multitude of my personal needs. I experience extreme joy going to work every day and providing nursing care to veterans. And I have had more good experiences than not, especially during Valor and working on MedSurg. I had a lot of great end of life conversations with these veterans, and it was a really touching experience for me. But also during that time, I initiated 2 rapid responses to manage acute crisis on 2 of my own patients. I responded to about 4 rapid responses to assist in acute crisis of other nurses' patients. I initiated 2 ethical reviews to assess patient care and whether or not we were ethically meeting the needs of a couple of veteran patients. I also initiated at least 2 VA police responses out of fear for my own personal safety or the safety of others. And as I was kind of jotting down some of the experiences, I was able to come up with 11 different patients over the course of 800 hours, 11 different patients over multiple shifts that contributed a spectrum of violence toward myself directly. But during that time, during those shifts, during those experiences, including calling VA police, there wasn't a single time that I was encouraged to file or write an incident report. And this is really the crux of what my research revealed, and it is the crux of a successful prevention program and a successful program that does mitigate violence or repeat violence. It's actually writing an incident report. I do want to say that the VA has really, the luxury of the VA is that we are bound to taxpayers. We have to show results, and that's different than the private sector. They have to report a profit to shareholders. We are bound to taxpayers and to veterans, and so I feel incredibly grateful to be at the VA, and it's why I think the VA has developed a system that works to meet healthcare ethics while promoting safety. So the Veterans Health Administration has what's called the Disruptive Behavior Reporting System. It's a system-wide way that past violent or disruptive behavior can be noted in the patient record, and it allows staff to plan and act to promote safety for all involved in an episode of care, and it ensures that the needed care is received. Now, access to care is a violence risk mitigation strategy. And when I read that, it can feel very overwhelming to know that that the healthcare industry, day in and day out, is a violence risk mitigation strategy. Now, in the private sector, the healthcare system can say, when you are violent, then we can ban you from care. You are not allowed to come back onto the property. If you do, you will be trespassed. Well, the VA's mission and ethics says something completely different. Our mission is to keep veterans in VHA healthcare by providing comprehensive workplace violence prevention programs and an organizational infrastructure to keep veterans in care. So, The prevention and management of disruptive behavior is how we refer to it. It meets that recommendation of my research that through leadership commitment, you will have employee engagement, which is key to the success of a program and reducing rates of violence. So our PMDB curriculum offers 4 levels. First, an introduction to violent concepts. Second, offering high quality, high level customer service. Being able to assess a situation and utilize verbal de-escalation skills sooner. And then level 3, which is limit setting, personal safety skills, and self-protection. So this is the more physical aspect of disruptive behavior that's now at assault level. And then level 4, which is therapeutic containment or intervening to control somebody physically in a violent act. Now, the employee role is to train in the PMDB concepts and in all of these levels, and then understand that at any level you can file an incident report. Now, the reporting system is critical because nothing after the report happens if the report is never filed. Only about 20% of VA incidents are actually reported, partly because of competing demands or nurses, healthcare providers not wanting to label a patient, or out of concern for their own reputation, or just wondering if it's even worth it, will it even work? And so solutions to those challenges are making reporting accessible, short, simple, secure, anonymous if you want to remain anonymous, and that there are identifiable outcomes. And then the incident report itself, which is extremely simple, just the location and time, who is reporting, who experienced the disruptive behavior, who was the disruptor, and then details of the incident. After that point, the employee is really done with that episode of care and that episode of incident. And then it moves into the leadership role. There's an assessment, an interdisciplinary team that assesses disruptive behavior reports to validate, mitigate, and respond to threats of violence, and to determine if those behaviors are effective or predatory. And this is where I think VHA's approach is successful, and how it reduces the rate of repeat offenders. So we develop a management plan with the veteran involved in the disruptive behavior, because people tend to support what they themselves create. And so the veteran, along with a patient advocate and an interdisciplinary team, will sit down and synthesize the risk factors involved in these incidents with the protective factors to prevent them from happening again. And then finally asking the veteran, is this a plan that you can stick to? So this is where VHA is really succeeding. Then after the plan is formed, it's communicated, usually through an e-banner on the chart. And so these are clear and concise. They give the person who has access to the chart a flag for behavior, and it could be verbal, it could be physical, or it could be risk of suicide or homicidal act. And then it includes what the warning signs are, like a very, very brief history of the behavior, how it's exhibited, and what the plan of action is. So I have 3 examples of how this works. So the first one is an example of predatory behavior that happened with one of my nursing peers that I share an office with. She had she was new to her role and was new to this veteran, and this veteran had developed a pattern of arriving as a walk-in to our clinic with various complaints. She would call him back to the nursing exam room to do a nursing assessment on his complaint, only to find that what he complained about to the front desk would be either different from what he complained about in the exam room, or it would be non-existent. For instance, he might complain about a rash on his upper thigh, and when she went to do an assessment, there would not be a rash present. And so this occurred as a pattern several times. And every time this veteran presented, the nurse's anxiety went up a little bit more. Finally, she had a conversation with the veteran to do some limit setting and talk to him about getting regular care from his provider and not utilizing the walk-in service. But if he needed to communicate, he could use secure message if he had questions or concerns that were non-urgent. So the veteran signed up for our e-messaging program called My Health Eva, and he began messaging his care team. His messages were inappropriate. He was asking the nurse to call him. Here is my mobile number, please text me. I think you're beautiful. Could we go out on a date? We belong together. Why won't you call me? So the behavior is escalating through secure message, and she brings it to the attention of her care team, and they decide together that the LPN, who is male, will do the secure messaging engagement in order to create a barrier. And then the attending physician was notified as well. So the experience is being communicated. Well, the veteran arrives to clinic again, and my nursing peer is visibly upset and frightened, frankly. And so I told her that she would not be seeing this veteran and that I was going to coordinate care. The care coordination included having a male LPN call the veteran back to the exam room and having a male covering provider do an assessment to see if there was an urgent or immediate need that needed to be met, and to discharge the veteran if it was safe. This way, my nursing peer could completely avoid interaction with this veteran. Once that was all arranged, I told the nurse that it was time to file a disruptive behavior report so that the situation could be assessed. I think when I reflect on this particular case, it bothers me that his behavior wasn't reported as soon as the pattern had been established. It went on way too long, and any person along the line could have and should have encouraged the nurse to file an incident report. You know, as it stands though, she finally wrote the report, it was assessed, and a management plan was developed with that veteran, which included being transitioned to a team with a male provider and a male nurse. And when he comes on campus, he is to report to VA police so that he can be accompanied to his appointments, the pharmacy or the lab, whatever care he's needing that day. Another example is actually one that I'm currently working with right now. He's not my patient, he's a patient on another panel, and his nurse care manager works remote. So I received a notification from the front desk that I had a walk-in for the remote nurse with a complaint. When the remote nurse received or saw that notification, she contacted me directly and let me know that this veteran had been triaged by her already that day, that she had offered him an episodic appointment. He had declined it, saying he just wants to see a nurse, he wants to see a nurse in person, he wants a nurse to look at him, he wants to talk to a nurse. So she said she felt concerned that he had presented, even though she had offered him the appropriate care. So I started my chart review for this veteran, and I saw that he was in his mid-20s. I saw that he also trains in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, which was a red flag for me. I also saw that he was a trained combat veteran. And about that time, the male clerk who had taken his initial complaint walked back to tell me specifically, I feel very uncomfortable with this veteran, something isn't right. He is acting very strange, and I thought that I needed to let you know I'm concerned about you being alone in an exam room with him. So I really appreciate the heads up, and it is a real team approach dealing with these people. And one of the overarching messages that my husband and I teach is trust your intuition. When your gut is screaming at you that something isn't right. So needless to say, my insides started to squirm, and I felt very concerned. So my team sprung into action and started to come up with a plan. We got our integrated care team psychologist. We notified her of this event, and then instead of me doing a nurse assessment alone in the exam room, I asked the covering provider, the doctor, to go in with me and to actually run the visit. Partly because I did not feel safe being alone. The other reason is because he has already had a nursing assessment. I'm not going to duplicate another nurse's work just to make the same recommendation. And third, I wanted a witness if his behavior was truly out of line. When this veteran was called back to the exam room, he refused to sit down. And he was acting very strange. He was contorting and twisting and bending his body. He kept walking up to the desk and putting his fingers under the desk to lift it off the floor. And then his complaint was very disjointed. His symptoms were very ambiguous, and his request for help was really, he just didn't have any. And so this was more of a psychological break than a psychological break rather than anything else. So we kind of took care of his immediate needs, and but then it was like, what happens next though? So we discharged him from care, and he's going to get an MRI, and he's going to do these other things, but what happens next? And the truth is, we don't know. We don't know what happens next. So the following week, last week, we get a repeat. So this is happening again. He's talked to his remote triage nurse. She contacts me directly, saying the same thing. He's demanding to see a nurse. And this time I really sat down and did a much deeper chart review and found that he had a history of suicidal ideation. He was a high risk for suicide and or homicide. He had been arrested in the prior year for violent assault. And he had utilized various resources as part of the VA to help him recover and rehabilitate, except that he had fallen off of all of those resources and stopped showing it. And then you can see as the chart builds that he will utilize resources inappropriately just over and over and over again, emergency department, episodic care, triage line, walk-in. But it's a definable pattern. And so after I discovered that we had not only a very well-defined pattern of behavior, it was very disruptive to the clinic and to the other areas that he was utilizing, like the emergency department, and that we weren't actually meeting his needs. His needs were psychological, and we really needed to get him help, and we needed to prevent the potential for a suicidal homicide. And so when he presented back to clinic demanding to see me, we put another plan in place, which was all of the providers involved are now writing disruptive behavior report. Instead of bringing the veteran back into the clinical space and into an exam room, which continues to allow him to cross over boundaries, I had a conversation with him in the lobby. And instead of doing, duplicating a nursing assessment or letting him see a doctor, which would have been inappropriate and would have continued to allow him to push those boundaries, I just let him know in the lobby, in a public space, that the same options were available to him. And I asked him at that time if he would like a call from our integrated care team to, talk about his mental health. We became very, very agitated during the conversation, but the conversation I would consider a success. We have VA police presence. They did not ever need to approach the veteran themselves, but they were there just in case anything stepped off. And I did make sure that the veteran felt safe and that he wasn't experiencing any suicidal ideation or thoughts of harming himself or others. And we made a follow-up phone call too to make sure that he was going to keep his appointment later that evening with the doctor and so on. What will happen with him is after the reports are reviewed, a management plan will be developed for him, which will probably include, reporting to VA police first and being escorted through the hospital, things like that. We'll see what gets determined. But those are just a couple examples of situations that we might face and how important the team approach is to dealing with these incidents. But really, the most important part of a workplace violence program, and the only way that it will ever be successful, is if we can initiate the reporting. And I think the same thing goes for your university. I'm sure has a workplace violence program, and possibly you as students go through it on your orientation. I don't know, but I'm sure that the staff and faculty do. But it is why incident reporting in any environment is absolutely critical to reducing rates of violence and developing systems that protect and serve those of us who are working or attending. So, in conclusion, I think I've kind of come up with 3 overarching themes as I look at my personal life, the skills that I've developed in my personal life, and how they contribute to or enhance my experience in my professional life, and how they really make me a better nurse, and how they enable me to better serve veterans and offer them a high level of customer service, for lack of a better word. So, like, the first overarching theme is that our personal life and our professional life are tied together. And I really had to sit myself down and really assess my values and my goals, and really identify why it was so important to me to spend so much time training in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and wrestling and judo and running and weightlifting and doing all the other things that I've done over the last few years. And why it's so important to me to share that knowledge and to share my story, hoping that people will be inspired to assess their own goals and values. So my why for doing this is because I have created a life that I love. I love my life, I love my work, and I love what my husband and I are building in the communities that we're serving and the way that we're serving them. I love my life so much that I am not going to let anyone or anything take it from me. The second overarching theme is that systems work. The VA system works when providers file an incident report, and it really works to reduce violence because we include the veteran in designing a plan that works for that veteran. So systems work, but all parts are necessary, and every person is essential. And then the last overarching theme is that culture is critical. Going back to the recommendation from my research all the way back in 2019 and my work through prevention and management of disruptive behavior, leadership's commitment is crucial to employee engagement. And that leadership cannot just talk about it, they have to be about it. They have to demonstrate in every actionable way that they are committed to employee and patient safety. And I think that the VA has done a good job of demonstrating that through continued assessment of their system of disruptive behavior reporting and developing plans to keep staff safe while being able to continue to provide care to as many veterans as possible. Thank you so much, and I am open to questions now, if anyone has any.
Who has questions? Give you time. Well, if you think of a couple of questions while they're thinking, yeah, I have a couple. So one question I have is, how come the VA is so receptive to, I mean, you mentioned that they're beholden to taxpayers and they have to, come up with results and so on. But a lot of times the complaint against, state-run or governmental organizations is that they can't do things as well as private entities, right? And it seems to me a lot of places that are private entities have a tendency to, hide bad things, to protect their reputation and so on. So how do you account for the fact that the VA has responded to this?
Yeah, that's really interesting. This is kind of one of the few areas where government did something right, I guess, you know what I mean? Like I said with my research, it was one of the problems that was identified was private health systems don't have to share, they're not obligated to share their episodes of violence or incident reporting or how they managed it or any of those other things. And it might be different if there was a system for reporting or something like that, but somehow the VA and this large, massive government institution, they got this one right. And I think it's because our mission is not to keep a veteran from getting care. Our mission is to find ways for veterans to access care and we do it in a multitude of ways. We do it in the home health setting, the telehealth setting, video. It is crazy how, especially through COVID, one of the benefits of COVID was all of the clever ways that we have figured out how to provide care. And so in order to fulfill that mission of providing care to veterans, we have to figure out how to do it safely. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. Go ahead, what do you have?
You can ask some questions about martial arts or competing or anything. I do want to mention, like I said, my husband and I travel all over the country to teach, and I was trying to figure out a way to maybe do a demonstration or maybe record a demonstration or something like that to show you. But my husband actually has a lot of stuff on his Instagram account. It's Paul Sharp SCG, or myself, Jill Sharp RN. If you follow us on Instagram, we put out a lot of great stuff. And if you ever wanted to invite us to Adrian College to teach a program, we'd be happy to do that too.
Yeah, I'm gonna work on that. We'll get you guys here, and then because I think it's valuable stuff, and I know one course or seminar isn't gonna it's gonna do some things, but like you said before with the training, you have to continue and so on. Any questions? Yeah, go ahead.
How do you manage, like, I don't know if she can hear that, like dealing mentally, I guess, with letting patients go that you think might be of risk to themselves or risk to others?
Did you hear the question?
Yes, how do we let anybody go who might harm themselves or others?
Yeah.
So, when a veteran, so first of all, we are responsible for asking very directly. And when you ask directly, people will usually answer you. I can't, I don't always know if it's the truth or not. However, if a veteran has exhibited certain behaviors, if they have said that they want to harm themselves or others, we have several things that we can do. We can either provide them with a crisis line, we can send out the police to do a healthcare check, a welfare check, I should say. We also have a special team at the VA that is interdisciplinary that can go to a veteran's home to assess the situation. And but mental health mental health is extremely challenging because the onus is really on the person to accept the resources and the help that are available. But we do take that very, very seriously, especially with veterans. And we are, I think, well-trained and highly skilled at assessing the level of risk. And we have the structure and the help in place. And we can go to a veteran's home if we have to.
Other questions?
Great question.
Target, huh? So, I have lots of questions, so I'm going to keep you here for another 5 minutes. So with martial arts training, you have the perception and maybe quite a bit of reality, right? That size strength difference between men and women is probably a factor, right? What does you mentioned your primary training is in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. How does that address that kind of discrepancy?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So I think one of the things that I understand that many don't is what 190 pound man, his level of strength, energy, and explosiveness, how that compares to myself as a 160-pound female. So if you have never been, had your wrist grabbed and been dragged, or been shoved up against the wall, or have been, maybe had a wrestling takedown or a judo throw, and then just have somebody pin you to the earth and keep you from getting up, it will be a shock if that ever happens to you and you are completely untrained. And so I think one of the benefits that I have is I have really focused on my customer service skills and my verbal de-escalation, because I never want to find myself in a physically violent situation with anybody, because I know what I'm going to have to deal with, and it doesn't matter how developed I'm in. It doesn't matter how developed I am in my martial art. I likely will not escape a violent episode without injury, without harm, and be that physical or mental. Yeah. And so I think that's one of the things that I can know and understand that other people might not, is that there are inherent differences between men and women, and man physical strength just is it is extremely difficult for me to cope with. So I train in our competition team Monday through Friday, 6 to 7 a.m. And we have heavyweights in that class, men 220, 230 pounds, all the way down to female athletes that weigh maybe 115. And so we've had to make a lot of adjustments. It's really great to train in a co-ed environment, and it is really important for a 115-pound female athlete to experience the pressure, the speed, strength of a 230-pound athlete. But doing that day in, day out poses inherent risks to her, right? Namely injury. So when we train in our competition team, we try to pair heavyweights, middleweights, lightweights, and female athletes together in their own lines. And part of that is just preserving our own bodies, also allowing females to develop an offensive strategy, because when we're training with men, we're always on defense. So
yeah, it makes sense, because otherwise, you're showing up and getting crushed, right? Every day, you need something to, a partner that's going to let the heat off a little bit and so on, gives you opportunity to, not just be worried about being crushed, but learn as you go. Makes sense.
yeah.
Questions? Anybody else? Well, we appreciate you coming. Give her a hand.